Does it feel like your child, or worse still, children, catch every virus that's going around? And just when one bug is clearing up, a week later there's another one knocking at the door. That cycle of 3 a.m. wake-ups with a hot, miserable, coughing child, the school pickup calls you dread, another round of antibiotics, another day of work missed, plans cancelled, lost sleep for the whole family. It's exhausting, and I know so many families struggle through the winter. And that's why I am hosting a free masterclass, Why Kids Get Sick Every Winter and What You Can Do About It. You can head on over to naturalsuperkids.com/winter to save your free seat. I'm going to be breaking down the 4 areas where most parents are accidentally making it harder for their child's immune system to do its job. We're going to talk about the real reasons your child keeps getting sick. It's rarely just bad luck. The truth about fever and why suppressing it too quickly can actually backfire. Hidden immune disruptors hiding in everyday habits and products, and the natural tools and strategies that actually help. I could not live without these in my family. It's going to be practical. I'd love to see you there. Head on over to naturalsuperkids.com/winter to save your seat. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Jessica Donovan here. We are continuing our winter wellness episode series today, and I want to cover some nutrient deficiencies that most GPs aren't checking that could be behind your child's constant colds. We know when we take our child to the doctor when they're sick again, or for the first time, or for the 10th time, there's usually one of two things that come out of a doctor's appointment, a GP appointment, when our child is sick. We're either told that it's a viral infection, it's normal for kids to get sick, just keep them hydrated, let them rest, and they'll be well again in no time. Or we are prescribed antibiotics. But what is often missed is some deeper digging into why a child, particularly if they're getting sick regularly, why they're sick yet again, or why the infections are knocking them out, whereas other kids are just sort of breezing through them with minor symptoms. And so that's what I want to talk about today, to give you the tools to be able to potentially ask for some further tests if your child is sick a lot. So the reason that nutrient deficiencies are often undiagnosed in kids is because a standard GP blood panel doesn't always include targeted enough testing that picks these things up. So the 2 nutrients that I want to talk about today are iron and zinc. So they are 2 of the most common nutrient deficiencies in kids, but they're not always associated with, constant sickness, infections, winter illnesses. And when they are talked about, often the testing that's being done isn't targeted enough. For example, a GP will refer for a standard blood panel, to make sure white blood cell count is okay, and that will check haemoglobin, but it doesn't give us the full picture in terms of what's going on for iron. And zinc is nearly always missed. And I want to talk about both of these nutrients in a bit more depth today. So what a lot of parents and even GPs don't understand is that even if a child is not anemic, doesn't show the signs of being anemic, or even the blood tests show they're not actually anemic, they can still have subpar iron levels that are going to affect immunity. And parents don't often connect iron to immune function, and a lot of doctors don't actually either. We think about low iron being pale, tired kids, but it's not always picked up in relation to immunity and infections. So let's talk about the role of iron in immunity. So essentially, iron is needed for the production and function of immune cells, particularly a couple of specific immune cells, T cells and natural killer cells. And low iron doesn't just make kids tired, it directly impairs a child's ability to mount an effective immune response. So when they're going to daycare or school and they've got low iron, they're going to be less likely to fight off those germs they will inevitably come in contact with. The other thing that iron affects is recovery. So kids that recover slowly from illness, that's really a red flag to us that iron could be low. They're tired, they stay sick for a long time, they're getting sick regularly, and they often have poor appetite and maybe restless sleep as well. They're two other signs that iron, is on the low side, or even a child is deficient in iron. So iron needs in kids are high. Even a very young child has iron needs that are higher than an adult man. So it can be really hard to meet the needs of iron, particularly if kids are fussy, particularly if they're fussy with meat, or if a family or a child does not eat meat in terms of because of preference, or because of that they're vegetarian or vegan. And even if children are eating meat regularly, iron can still be low because it's a fairly there's lots of factors within the gut that can affect absorption. So kids that have constipation or other gut issues are more likely to be iron deficient as well. Not necessarily because they're not getting enough in, but because they're not absorbing enough iron. Dairy also displaces, for want of a better word, iron. So when kids are eating a lot of dairy, a lot of calcium in their diet, calcium and iron sort of fight for, or that they fight for absorption. So if we're getting calcium and iron in at the same time, often calcium will win and iron won't be absorbed. So kids that are still drinking a lot of milk or eating a lot of dairy are at risk of iron deficiency as well. So there's, a lot of things that can lead to low iron, and it's not always just intake. Babies are particularly prone to iron deficiency. Their levels start to really drop at around, 6 months, which is why it's really important to get a lot of iron-rich foods in those initial months of starting solids, because they're relying on their maternal store, the stores that they had when they were in mum. So they really need to build those stores up. And if mum was iron deficient during pregnancy or while she was breastfeeding, that puts baby at a higher risk of iron deficiency as well. And even into toddler years, we will often see toddlers that are iron deficient, and it really goes back to the fact that mum was iron deficient through pregnancy and breastfeeding. So if you're breastfeeding, take extra care of your iron levels to keep your bub's iron levels, up that little bit more as well. So that's iron. And when it comes to testing iron, haemoglobin is not enough. We really want to make sure we're looking at getting iron studies done because that gives us the full picture of what's going on with iron. And one of the, I guess, biggest kind of markers within those iron studies is ferritin. So ferritin is your stored iron. And the range for ferritin is really fairly broad. I think most labs will say, above 20 is okay. But we really want to be seeing ferritin more around that 50 and above for it to be optimal. Anything below that, is suboptimal. It's not ideal. So if you're you really want to have a look at those blood tests yourself or ask for that ferritin level because doctors will say the ferritin is fine if it's over 20. I mean, I've seen blood test results where it's 22. Under 20 is iron deficient. Put simply, there are other markers that are looked at as well, but 22 is fine. We really want to be seeing it, above that sort of 50 level. So that's something to watch out for. If you have iron tests handy that your child has had, make sure, that they are sort of around that 50 mark of ferritin or above. Then we want to look at zinc as well. And the thing about zinc and iron is they are found in a lot of the same food sources. So animal protein, particularly red meat, is high in both iron and zinc. So whenever we see children that don't have a lot of red meat in their diet, we do want to be thinking about, are their iron and zinc levels, adequate? So zinc is one of the most important minerals for iron function. It's involved in almost every aspect of the immune response. And you will see a lot of immune boosting supplements or immune supportive supplements do contain zinc. And that's the reason. We will often prescribe zinc as one of the nutrients to support immunity. Because, it is involved in so many aspects of the immune response. Low zinc is associated with increased susceptibility to respiratory infections. And zinc also supports the gut barrier integrity. And that's important when it comes to that all-important gut immune relationship. So, if the gut barrier integrity is not there because a child is low in zinc, then that's going to be affecting the immune system in that sort of way, in that indirect way, because when the gut is out of balance or out of whack, then that is going to be affecting the immune system. So signs that zinc may be a factor or may be low in your child: getting colds and infections frequently. White spots on the nails is another sign to look out for in terms of zinc deficiency. Zinc is really important in healing. So if your child heals slowly, like if they cut themselves and they take a long time to heal, that can be a sign that zinc is low. Zinc is also associated with appetite. So there's often reduced appetite in kids with zinc deficiency, and skin issues can be a sign that zinc is low as well. Zinc is depleted by stress, by illness. So when a child has had, a lot of stress or a lot of illness or even a lot of something like anxiety, which can cause stress in the body, they can need extra zinc to sort of make up for that. And kids that have lots of processed food in their diet or low animal protein in their diet, low red meat in their diet, have a higher chance of being zinc deficient. Now, zinc is a bit of a trickier one to test for. There are definitely blood tests that you can get for zinc, but the different sort of ways of testing zinc tell us different things. So if we are testing serum or plasma zinc, it needs to be tested in the morning while the patient is fasting. And it's important to note that if a child is in active infection, then the levels will drop of zinc. So we want to make sure our kids aren't sick at the time that we are testing serum or plasma zinc. And then we have red blood cell zinc. So this sort of it's a blood test as well, and it reflects longer term zinc. So it's better for detecting whether a child has more of that chronic depletion. But the kind of tricky part about this one is if a child has recently taken zinc supplements, it can cause this test to be sort of falsely elevated above what their sort of level was without the supplements. There's also, zinc has a very close relationship with copper. So we do like to often test zinc with copper to look at that ratio as well. So it's not as straightforward. A lot of doctors aren't very knowledgeable when it comes to zinc testing. So always sort of talk to a practitioner that is knowledgeable about nutrition when looking at getting zinc tested. And levels like the optimal levels do vary a little bit between different age brackets and things like that as well. So it's not a test that, we recommend you sort of interpret yourself. I mean, we never recommend interpreting tests themselves, but there are some sort of benchmarks that can be helpful to know, such as that sort of ferritin above sort of 50 that can be helpful to know. But for zinc, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So it's important not to self-diagnose or diagnose your child or self-supplement without guidance, because that there are some complexities to both zinc and iron. You definitely don't want to take an iron supplement just in case your child is deficient, because if we're taking too much iron, the wrong form of iron, there are problems there. Even if we're taking a really good quality iron supplement, where it's not needed or too much is taken, it can interfere with the balance and absorption of other important minerals. So we really don't want to be taking iron unless there is a reason for it, unless the levels have been looked at and they are requiring some supplementation. Short-term zinc supplement is less of a problem. But again, we want to make sure that we are, taking the right amount. Too much zinc can definitely interfere with other minerals as well. So we want to make sure we're getting, professional advice and working with a health practitioner when looking at supplementing or, looking at the levels of these nutrients. So when you are going to the GP and wanting more information on your child's iron and zinc, just sort of start the conversation in a curious way. I've heard or I've come across information or even, citing some research that shows that, iron deficiency is really common in kids. And on that, we know that Australian research suggests that 1 in 3 children are iron deficient. And that's in healthy kids, not those who are obviously unwell. There are some stats sort of floating around that say 50% of kids are thought to be iron deficient. I think that is based on some research on kids that had some health issues. So the 1 in 3 children statistic, I mean, that's huge enough in itself, is based on a healthy population. And so we want to be sort of bringing these conversations up with our GP and asking, is it okay if we, or I'd really like to minimize any further blood testing. So can we please do full iron studies, not just haemoglobin and ferritin? So commonly GPs will say, well, just test ferritin first. But then if ferritin comes back low, then they want to do full iron studies. And we really don't want to be putting young kids or kids at all through more blood tests than is necessary. So that's something definitely to talk about with your GP. And then asking, can we also please test serum or plasma zinc, as well as red blood cell zinc, and zinc and copper ratio as well. Depending on the GP, whether you get that referral or not will be a question mark. You just want to be going into that appointment with as much information as possible, and reasons as to why. Like, my child really doesn't eat a lot of red meat, or they're getting sick regularly, they've got slow recovery, I'm really concerned about their zinc levels. And you can sort of go from there. And when you work with practitioners such as us, the practitioners here at Natural Super Kids, we can send referral letters, and we've got different ways that we can get that testing done if GPs are not on board, because sometimes they are not. It really is worth thinking about iron and zinc if your child is getting sick regularly, particularly if they're fussy eaters, they don't eat a lot of animal protein or red meat, and getting the levels of these nutrients up can make a huge difference to how well your child is through the winter. These are just a couple of factors that affect immunity, but they're really common ones that we see, and I hope that this has been helpful for you to have a listen of. Thank you so much for listening, and send us a message if you need help with your child's iron or zinc levels. You can actually email us at support@naturalsuperkids.com, or you can send us a message on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.